Richard Jones was so foolishly fond of his daughter Daniela, he told someone if she wanted the courthouse to give it to her and charge him for the expense. Daniela was only 16 when in 1858 she married Ben Sherrod. Sherrod was the grandson of Benjamin, who was largely responsible for the Tuscumbia to Decatur Railroad. The plantation that Ben inherited, called Pond Spring, ran beside the track. Ella would not live here long, for both Ben and daughter Ella died in 1861. Daniela and her son Richard Jones Sherrod left Pond Spring to return to the Jones home, Caledonia. On October 9th in 1863, a Confederate company crossed the Tennessee River at Lock A and asked permission to camp on the grounds of Caledonia. Anne Lane McWhirter, whose family plantation adjoined Caledonia, tells the story as she heard it from her ancestors.
Her father waked her up and told her that there was some Confederate officers there and for her to come down and do something about it. That she put on her oldest, worst-looking house coat and came down and did get them some food together. And my understanding is that the officers stayed there for several days.
In January 1863, General Joseph Wheeler achieved the rank of Major General. He earned the rank at age 26, mainly because of his military exploits. That made him the youngest general in the Confederate Army. A graduate of West Point in 1859, he was following an example set by his grandfather, General William Hull. Hull gained fame in the Revolution and the War of 1812. A portrait of General Hull's wife, Julia Knox Hull, hangs in the Wheeler home.
Yes, I do know about that. It's a reproduction of Mrs. William Hull, General Hull's wife. And that was General Wheeler's grandmother, and the Hulls, of course, were from New England.
Joseph Wheeler's record during the war between the states is well documented. When the war ended, General Robert E. Lee said the two ablest cavalry officers which the war developed were General J.E.B. Stuart of Virginia and General Joseph Wheeler of the Army of Tennessee. The general returned to marry Daniela in February 1866, just after the death of her second child, Richard Jones Sherrod. After a business venture in New Orleans, they came to Pond Spring, which Colonel Jones had purchased for them, and lived in the antebellum home.
This house is a Federal-style house. The front wing, the two-story I wing, is logs. Underneath the vinyl is a poplar siding on top of logs. It was completed probably around 1830. We don't have any definitive dates on any of the structures yet. That's one of the things I'm researching, is dates on the houses and the structures.
Wheeler practiced law in Cortland, and the children came along in rapid succession between 1867 and 1881, as this picture shows. Lucy Lucille, Annie Early, Julia Knox, Joseph, Carrie Peyton, and Tom Fenwick. Daughter Ella died at the age of 2 in 1871. The children were baptized in the Episcopal faith.
My grandmother's brother, Charles Cabanis, was a minister here in the valley, got to know and baptized the Wheeler children. And so for that reason, I had a special connection with Miss Wheeler. I went down there shortly before she died, must have been in the early 1950s. We had a very pleasant conversation, and in the course of the conversation, she found out I was an Episcopalian, and she told me that Reverend Charles Cabanis baptized her. And I said, well, he was my great uncle, and so that made me very special with Miss Annie.
The children had a governess, Miss Brinkley, who taught them many subjects at Wheeler, particularly art. Daughter Lucy, or Bertie as she was called, showed promise in art. Seeing the happiness of his own children prompted General Wheeler to lead a crusade to provide for the orphan children of Confederate General John B. Hood in 1879. Young Wheeler hands prepared a special bale of cotton. It was decorated with brass ties and domestic lining and shipped from Wheeler Station to New York. It sold for $250. The money went to the Hood children. The town of Wheeler was incorporated in 1873, and Wheeler Station was established by the president of the railroad as a token of respect to his former military commander. Many bales of cotton were shipped from here. Raymond Coffey was born on the Wheeler plantation.
There were a lot of people in Wheeler. Wheeler at that time had more population than the town of Cortland because of all the tenant houses. It was a large plantation, and people were working crops with mules primarily, and they could only work about 40 acres per family. So, yeah, there was a sizable population here.
The railroad continued to be the link to the outside world, particularly after General Wheeler was elected to Congress in 1880. Until his resignation in 1899, he distinguished himself several ways, including serving on the powerful Ways and Means Committee. Wheeler also fought for a better system of education, lower tariffs, and improvements on the Tennessee River. The children were caught up in the social world of Washington and made lifelong friends there. Ella Jones Wheeler would not live to see her husband go forth to another war, for she died in 1896. Son Joseph graduated fourth in his class at West Point in 1895. He accompanied his father to Cuba during the Spanish-American War in 1898. General Wheeler was in charge of cavalry forces and was called the Hero of Santiago. Son Tom served in the Navy during the war and was drowned in September 1898 trying to save the life of a fellow sailor. His body was brought home on the train and buried in the family cemetery. When General Wheeler died in New York in January 1906, his casket rested under the intertwined colors of the Confederacy and the Union States. Former cavalrymen who served under Wheeler in the Civil and Spanish-American Wars formed part of the Honor Guard. President Theodore Roosevelt, whose Rough Riders had served under Wheeler in the late conflict, was there as well. Wheeler was buried at Arlington National Cemetery after services in St. John's Episcopal Church in Washington. Lucy, often called Bertie, loved the plantation, preferred it to Washington, and remained there whenever possible until her death in 1924. She was in charge of the plantation in 1918 when Gilbert Harris's father was farming at Wheeler.
I remember that spring or winter. Back then, people got this fertilizer to make the crop in January, most of it. And it come a snow and a freeze and a thaw, and the road was so bad from Wheeler to Cortland you couldn't travel it. And she called up the railroad and they had I don't know why they carried it into Cortland, but we had to haul our fertilizer out of Cortland. And she called up and got word where we could go down the railroad with the wagon and team and come back with our fertilizer. They could make it on there, but the road was so bad, thawed, couldn't make it on there. I remember that very well.
Bertie loved children, and the family albums abound with pictures. Photos of the young members of the family include Harrison Buck, son of Carrie Wheeler, and Gordon Buck, who were married in the house in 1906. Julia Harris, Jr., daughter of Julia Wheeler, and Senator William Harris also spend their summers at the Wheeler home. There were hay rides, picnics on the mountain, and hikes through the woods, like the bitter cold day when an observer saw Miss Bertie and Miss Annie in a deep snow. One had lost an overshoe, but they came on, exclaiming over the beautiful formations of ice crystals on the trees and the tints of the snow in the shadows. The child who watched them would never forget them, ignoring the weather and admiring nature. Pictures of the Wheeler house in the 1920s show a rather bare landscape. It was not until after the death of Bertie in 1924 that Annie began gathering boxwood. She collected the plants from abandoned houses and friends and other sources and planted flowers to transform the grounds into a Garden of Eden. Plans for the gardens were not complete when Mr. Albert Turner came with his family to Wheeler in 1935. Turner remained here until about 2 years before his death in 1995. His daughter, Nell Turner Dirks, speaks of him.
Under what circumstances did you come?
My father worked for Southern Railway, and at the time he was, I guess that's when he was the agent here in Wheeler until the agency was cut out. This was about the time that Joe Wheeler Dam was being built, so Southern still had a station here, and he served as the station master and the postmaster. We lived here, oh, I didn't research this, but I guess probably 2 years. And then he moved to another agency. The station was still here, but the agency had been cut out. The post office was still housed in the old depot.
In 1938, the Turners moved into the old Hickman Sherrod house and became like members of the family.
But Mr. Albert Turner was an asset to this estate. Tremendous man, a hard-working man, meant so much to so many of us. And he was a right hand. He used to go up and sit and read with her and spend time with her. When she could no longer read the Bible, he'd read the Bible to her.
At the invitation of Miss Annie and later of Mr. Turner, members of such organizations as the United Daughters of the Confederacy met here annually from about 1927. One of the favorite workers on the place was Tony, an ex-slave whom the family loved. He made a cradle and many items of furniture in the house. He drove for Miss Bertie and Miss Annie and performed many other tasks.
She had a man that lived on her farm and drove for her after she got older and couldn't drive, named Tony. It was a black man that was very loyal to Miss Annie. And someone had told her one day that, did you know Tony's stealing your corn? And in all of her little, I think she was only about 2 or 3 inches tall, she kind of laid back and she said, young man, that's my corn and my Tony and none of your business.
Ernest Smith says when Miss Annie was ready to go somewhere on the train, Tony would go to the station and have them to hold the train until she was ready. According to some, Tony is buried on the grounds. Through the years, the size of the plantation has dwindled from about 20,000 acres to some 14,000. The smaller size is partially due to the forced sale to TVA in the 30s, which the family fought in vain. Houses and grounds have deteriorated. In 1994, the houses and 50 acres of the grounds, including outbuildings and cemetery, became properties of the state. The Wheeler plantation was donated by heirs Miss Lucy LeGrand and sons John and Gordon to the state of Alabama through the Alabama Historical Commission.
Said the site is so extensive and so intact is what makes the place so unique. The interior of the big house that the general built, we have uniforms and swords and medals and military history. Wonderful collection of what you might find in your grandmother's attic. 32 trunks with clothing and all sorts of curtains and draperies and rugs, and it's just really amazing. It's a historic preservationist dream, or some mornings it's a nightmare.
Architectural plans by Harvey Jones and archaeological digs under direction of Dr. Linda Stein of Samford University are underway.
Why do it? It's like, don't dig it unless you dig it right. And you never know what might be found. A lot of times people will think an area's been destroyed. Like here at Wheeler, they may think it's been plowed away. Any old Indian sites would be plowed away, but we've been fortunate there's certain areas that have not been so deeply plowed.
People need to learn more about it to be able to really help the state fund this. It's a very, very good project for Alabama history.
We think we might have another building that people didn't suspect was here in front of the old log cabin, the dog trap.
Well, the Alabama Historical Commission believes that before we go in to restore a building, we should do the archaeological survey first, because when we do restoration, we disturb the soil. If we don't save the past, we don't realize what will happen to us in the future. That's how we learn, is by studying the past.
A federal grant of over $400,000 will be used to bring in water lines and rewire the 2 homes. Remaining funds will be used to restore the log cabin dating back to 1818. Any leftover money will be spent to rescue other outbuildings in danger of collapse like this storage shed. It will be a long and expensive process, and the General Joe Wheeler Home Foundation will gladly accept your donations.